The hangar was already cooling as the evening winds pushed in from the coastline, carrying the mixed scent of salt, JP8, and hot metal. Rotors clattered to a stop one by one, leaving a fading hum that vibrated through the steel floor. Tool carts rattled. A forklift beeped in reverse. Marines moved in tight patterns, checking straps, logging hours, wiping down panels, end-of-day muscle memory. Near the edge of the flight line, under an amber safety light, a woman stood quietly with a dull gray Pelican case at her feet. No unit patch. No name tape. Just a worn hoodie, black cargo pants, and boots scuffed from more places than this base had maps for. She blended in so well that half the squad hadn't even noticed she was there until the captain walked over. He was loose, joking, the way Marines get after 12 hours in the sun. His crew followed, chuckling as he nudged her shoulder lightly with the back of his hand, more teasing than rude. He asked her something casual, something he thought was harmless. A joke that usually got a laugh. "So what's your call sign, ma'am?" A couple of Marines snorted. One elbowed another. Someone muttered, "Bet it's something cute." She didn't look up right away. She just tightened her grip on the Pelican case handle, thumb brushing a small dent near the latch. Then she lifted her chin enough for the captain to see her eyes, calm, steady, unblinking. Sticky 6. The name hit the air like a dropped wrench. The captain froze. His smile collapsed. And every Marine in earshot went silent, the entire hangar shifting from noise to a sharp, ringing stillness. Dawn crawled over the desert like a tired animal, dragging a gray haze across the horizon. The air still held the sour burn of cordite, diesel, and scorched rubber. Nothing about the morning felt clean. The tents, the vehicles, even the sunlight itself seemed covered in dust and smoke. A medevac bird lifted off in the distance, its rotors chopping through the silence before fading into sky. Inside a crowded makeshift medical tent, she woke to the dry crackle of a plastic floor bag swaying above her. A thin band of gauze wrapped around her left forearm. Another crossed her ribs. Her clothes were still streaked with dried mud, soot, and someone else's blood she hadn't bothered to brush off. Before she even swung her legs off the cot, she checked her gear at her feet. Helmet first, then plates, then the folded map still tucked inside her vest pocket. The habit survived impact better than she did. The night before lived in flashes. A convo. A grid reference. Her voice over the radio, steady at first, then sharp. Artillery streaking across the dark like angry stars. 6 positions she coordinated under impossible pressure, pinning enemy teams in place long enough for the battered column to push through. The tent around her buzzed with low, tired murmurs. Corpsmen shuffled between cots, clipboards in hand, their boots leaving faint prints of dried mud on the canvas floor. When they looked at her, their voices softened. One nodded at her bandages with a kind of respect he didn't say out loud. Another whispered to a colleague, and she caught only 2 words. "Saved everyone." She didn't respond. Survival wasn't the same as success. Not when she could still hear the screams in the radio static. Later, she stepped out into the cold on unsteady legs. The wind lifted the edges of her torn sleeve, stinging the bruises beneath. Marines moved around her in a rhythm of exhaustion, carrying gear, loading trucks, sweeping debris. Some paused when she passed. Not to talk. Not to thank. Just to look at her a moment too long, as if trying to reconcile the quiet woman in front of them with what they knew she'd done in the dark. Rumors already moved faster than the dust. Sticky. Sticky rounds. Sticky calls. Sticky 6. In the chow tent, she sat alone at a corner table, metal tray steaming in front of her. Oatmeal, a bruised apple, powdered eggs. She ate like it was a job, methodical, small bites, barely tasting anything. Her hands trembled only when she set the spoon down. She clenched them beneath the table until they steadied. No one disturbed her. Not out of disrespect. Out of caution. Even the one she'd saved didn't know what to say to her. Outside, the early sunlight glared off a torn section of barbed wire. She reached into her pocket and touched the small compass she always carried. The brass casing was scratched and dull, the hinge loose from years of field use. but the needle still swung with purpose. Her thumb brushed the same worn edge again and again, tracing it like a ritual. The compass had belonged to someone she trusted, someone who hadn't walked out of that night. She closed her fist around it. The base was waking up. Vehicles revving. Distant booms from test fires. The ocean of sand stretching far beyond the walls, hiding whatever came next. She exhaled slowly, long enough for the cold air to sting her lungs. Survival didn't feel like victory. It felt like debt. And dawn was only the first reminder. The base on the coast looked nothing like the desert she'd come from. Here, the air smelled of disinfectant and fresh paint, not smoke. The buildings rose in precise geometric lines, clean concrete, tinted windows, badge scanners blinking at each entrance. The only sound was the low hum of HVAC units and the muted thuds of boots on polished floors. Everything felt too calm, too controlled, like the world had taken a deep breath and refused to exhale. She walked through the wide hallway of the administrative wing with a manila envelope tucked under her arm. Inside were her temporary reassignment orders, counseling summaries, and a short note about operational decompression, a phrase someone in a distant office had typed without understanding any part of it. She paused outside an office door marked with a small brass plate. The major inside didn't look up until she stepped across the threshold. Forms slid across a desk. Pens clicked. Pages turned. The major's hands moved with efficient detachment, stamping, signing, initialing. When he reached her file, his eyebrows twitched for half a second, just enough to show that the title, Sticky 6, had found its way into her record, and he knew what it meant. He pressed his lips together, closed the folder, and turned it slightly away as if shielding it from view. No words. Just the quiet shift of someone who understood the gravity without acknowledging it. When the paperwork ended, she was directed down another hallway into the operations wing. The lights here were colder, whiter. Rows of workstations lined the room. Large screens displayed maps, satellite feeds, mission schedules, and rolling data streams. Analysts typed in near-perfect unison. Telemetry windows refreshed every few seconds with new coordinates. A captain in the ops cell pointed to an empty workstation without making eye contact. The gesture was small, quick, dismissive. She set her manila envelope down and pulled the chair out, the wheels rolling too loudly in the sterile quiet. Her new role came through a brief PDF summary on the monitor. Intelligence Liaison/Analyst Support, Temporary Duty Assignment. She scrolled. Limited operational involvement. Assisting with non-critical targeting workflows. Non-deployable status pending review. Non-deployable. That part stung more than she expected. Her workstation was bare except for a black keyboard, a mouse, and a small space beside the monitor. She placed the brass compass there, its scratched lid catching the reflection of the overhead lights. The needle trembled for a moment before settling north. Hours passed in soft keystrokes and quiet observation. She reviewed inbound intel packets, updated spreadsheets, cleared routine data entries. Nothing dangerous. Nothing meaningful. The kind of tasks given to people who were expected to stay out of the way. Across the room, she caught glimpses of subtle behavior. Two analysts leaning together, glancing at her screen, then straightening up when she looked. A lieutenant reading her file on a tablet before locking it and walking off quickly. A civilian contractor closing a door a little too softly when she approached the conference hallway. Not hostility. Not fear. Just the uneasy tension of people who knew her name but not her story. At noon, she skipped the cafeteria. The idea of sitting among officers with polished boots and neatly pressed uniforms made her stomach knot. Instead, she stayed at her station, eating an MRE she tucked in her bag out of habit. The metallic taste of the entree reminded her of field rations under desert stars. She swallowed hard and kept typing. A soft chime sounded from her monitor, an internal notification. Assignment update, JTF 27 Joint Exercise Integration. Role, Liaison to Marine Aviation Unit. Reporting Officer, Captain Lawson. Marine Aviation. Her eyes stayed on that line. Same unit designation she remembered from the night that carved her call sign into history. Same unit that had misaligned their timing. Same unit whose comms patterns later showed anomalies she still couldn't explain. She leaned back in her chair, letting the room's cold air settle over her. On another monitor across the room, a map displayed coastal flight routes highlighted in blue and red. One of the red lines curved sharply at a familiar grid point, the same kind of redirect she'd seen before things went wrong. She didn't react outwardly. No tension in her jaw. No change in her breath. She simply reached for her compass, flipped it open, and tapped the lid with her thumb, 3 soft taps, like she used to do before calling in fire missions. The needle steadied. Her pulse didn't. The paper walls around her weren't just walls. They were clues. And someone, somewhere, was hoping she would stay buried behind them. The ops cell emptied out slowly as evening settled over the base. One by one, screens dimmed, chairs pushed back, jackets lifted from chairbacks. Doors clicked shut in soft, orderly rhythm. Soon the room was left to the low electrical hum of servers and the soft vibration of air vents pushing cool air through ceiling ducts. She stayed. Her workstation glowed in the quiet, a lone island of light in a room meant for dozens. The compass lay beside her keyboard, lid open, needle trembling with the faint electromagnetic buzz from the monitors. She didn't touch it. Not yet. Instead, she opened the restricted archive folder again, her credentials still active from earlier. Rows of mission codes appeared, each tied to timestamps, coordinates, and after-action summaries. She scrolled until she reached the night stamped into her bones. The incident had been labeled something vague and clinical. Category C: Operational Disruption. Disruption. That was one way to describe a night that split a unit in half. She scanned the grid references first. Her eyes tracked each number, overlaying them in her mind on maps she had memorized over years of deployments. The shapes formed patterns: flight paths curving too late, support fire arriving too early, vehicle columns turning when they should have held their line. She brought up the artillery fire logs. Line after line of coded entries. Everything looked correct at first glance. But she wasn't looking at first glances. She leaned forward, pulling up the comms transcripts next. Timestamps ran down the screen like quiet warnings. One stood out, the same redirect order she remembered receiving, the one that pushed her convoy into exposed ground. The transcript showed it came from a weather advisory node. That never made sense. The weather that night had been clear. She toggled to meteorological reports. No storms. No wind surge. Not even cloud interference. The advisory was false. She took a slow breath, careful and measured, keeping her pulse from spiking. Then she opened another file, aviation logs from the Marine unit she'd just been assigned to. She wasn't expecting the connection to be this direct, this clean. But the same phrasing appeared there too. Vector adjust. Advisory Node 9. Weather delay. Only the dates were different. She opened both files side by side. 2 missions months apart. 2 different theaters. 2 different objectives. Same redirect pattern. Same coded language. Same advisory source. Only one person, or one system, could have initiated both. She expanded the metadata of the advisory logs. The entries were wiped clean of user IDs, replaced with generic placeholders. Sloppy or confident. Her jaw tightened, but only for a second. She forced her face back into stillness. Patterns were easier to see when emotion didn't cloud the view. Next, she opened a map overlay program used only by senior targeting personnel. She wasn't supposed to have access. But her prior clearance levels hadn't been downgraded correctly after reassignment. A mistake by someone who underestimated how quiet she could be. Layer by layer, she stacked the convoy route, the flight paths, the artillery arcs, and the false weather advisories. The combined image revealed a curved funnel shape, an engineered kill zone. Not coincidence. Not fog of war. Not bad timing. Design. On another screen, she pulled up the personnel roster for the Marine Aviation Unit involved in the current exercise. Names, ranks, and billets filled the list. One name had a note attached. Long-term interagency coordination, vetted. She clicked it. Access denied? But she had enough. She tapped the lid of her compass twice, then slid the saved files onto a secured external drive, a small black device no bigger than her thumb. When she stood up, the room felt colder. Silent. Too still. She powered down her workstation, closed the compass carefully, and tucked the drive into her pocket. Someone had buried the truth under layers of data. Someone with authority. Someone inside the same unit she would fly with in the coming days. The numbers weren't just telling a story. They were pointing to a person. And now she knew where to look. Rain rolled across the tarmac in thin, wind-driven sheets, turning every surface slick and reflective. Red beacons blinked through the mist like slow, mechanical heartbeats. The flight line vibrated under the churn of engines warming up, rotors thumping, turbines groaning, headsets crackling with clipped instructions. The night smelled of jet exhaust, wet asphalt, and the faint tang of sea air drifting inland. She approached the waiting tiltrotor with her hood pulled low, pelican case in one hand, harness in the other. Crew chiefs moved around her in practiced urgency, cinching straps, checking hydraulics, wiping rain from control panels. None paid her more than a glance. To them, she was just a liaison, an observer, a passenger, nothing that required salutes or attention. The ramp lowered with a metallic hiss. Inside, dim red lights glowed along the ceiling, casting the interior in a blood-warm haze. Marines were already strapped into the side benches, helmets down, visors up, rain dripping off their gear. The captain, Lawson, stood near the cockpit doorway, reviewing a tablet with a bored posture, leaning one shoulder against the bulkhead. He flicked his eyes toward her, taking in the plain hoodie, the lack of insignia, the unimposing frame. His half-smile said everything, another paper pusher tagging along. A chore, not a concern. She clipped her harness into the floor track without a word. The metallic click was swallowed by the rising drone of engines. As the aircraft lifted, the ground fell away into a smear of lights and shadow. Rain streaked sideways across the windows, distorting the world into shifting lines. The interior shook lightly as they pushed through low clouds. Conversations crackled over the internal comms, routine banter, mission updates, stale jokes. Lawson gestured loosely in her direction, narrating something about civilian analysts to his crew. They laughed. She didn't look up. Instead, she secured her tablet to her thigh with the elastic strap and opened the flight plan. Data scrolled in quiet blue lines. Names of checkpoints. Altitudes. Timing sequences. The route traced a familiar path along the coastline before curving inland toward the joint exercise staging area. On the surface, everything looked normal. Then the first discrepancy appeared. A minor redirect, barely a deviation, issued from an advisory node she recognized from her archive review. A code she'd seen before. A phrase she could almost hear in the static of her memory. She double-checked the original plan. No redirect had been scheduled. The tiltrotor banked mildly, following the new vector. She felt the shift in her stomach before the map confirmed it. Her fingertips rested gently on the tablet screen, tapping once, an old habit, a grounding measure. Her breath slowed. The comms flared with another update. Advisory Node 9 recommends delay on approach due to unexpected crosswinds. Crosswinds? She glanced at the flight environmental data. Clear skies. Steady air. No wind patterns anywhere near them. She looked across the aircraft at Lawson. He was still laughing with his crew, oblivious to the false calls shaping their trajectory. He didn't know what had happened to her unit months ago. He didn't know how close they were to flying into a mirrored pattern. She switched the tablet to manual overlay mode, stacking the present route atop the archived data she had saved. The two paths aligned with unnerving precision, curving toward a valley that would mask ground sensors and limit escape vectors. Not a kill zone tonight. But a message. Or a test. She unfastened her pelican case. Inside, secured in foam, lay a compact sensor suite, labeled Environmental Diagnostic Kit. Something harmless enough for a liaison to carry. But inside it was a powerful multi-spectrum scanner capable of spotting buried equipment, camouflaged beacons, and spoofed transmitters. She keyed it on. The device hummed softly, LEDs flickering through rain-patterned reflections on the aircraft walls. Data streamed in narrow green lines across her screen. 3 signatures. All too deliberate. All positioned to intercept the aircraft's planned descent. Her voice never reached above a calm level when she spoke into the aircraft intercom. Not a shout, not a warning, just a quiet directive issued with complete certainty. She instructed the crew chief to run a verification sweep. It wasn't a request. It was the tone of someone who had given orders in darker places. The crew chief hesitated. Lawson straightened. Something in her posture made him freeze mid-breath. Not fear. Recognition. A sense that the civilian in the hoodie wasn't a passenger. The aircraft shifted as the sensors scanned the valley below. Lines lit up on the crew chief's monitor, false beacons, misidentified equipment, and irregular comms pings matching the same signature as the advisory node responsible for the redirect. Lawson stepped close, bracing himself on the overhead rail. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. The tension in his jaw and the sudden tightness in his grip told the story. He knew this wasn't normal. He knew she was seeing something he wasn't trained to interpret. He knew she wasn't who she appeared to be. When the verification sweep completed, the truth was undeniable. Someone had manipulated their approach under the guise of a harmless training update. Someone inside the same system that had once rerouted her convoy into hell. She locked the tablet, slid it into her bag, and looked at Lawson for the first time during the flight. The expression she gave him was almost nothing, calm, steady, unreadable, but it told him everything. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't weather. And she knew exactly how to stop it. The aircraft banked away from the valley. A new heading. A safer line. Rain hammered the fuselage, drowning out every other sound. In the red glow of the cabin lights, Lawson finally understood why the hangar had gone silent when she spoke her call sign. Sticky 6 wasn't a nickname. It was a warning. The inquiry room was colder than the hallway outside, as if the ventilation had been set a few degrees lower on purpose. A rectangular table dominated the center, its surface polished enough to reflect the overhead fluorescence in harsh white strips. A small recording unit blinked red in the corner, steady, patient, unblinking. A stainless carafe of coffee sat untouched beside a stack of paper cups. She entered without hesitation, pelican case in one hand, compass in her pocket, expression controlled and unreadable. She chose a seat with her back to the wall, where she could see every face, every shifting posture, every flicker of discomfort. Across the table sat 3 officers, a colonel, a lieutenant colonel, and a JAG attorney. Their uniforms were crisp, creases sharp, name tapes perfectly aligned. Beside them, a civilian analyst sat with a laptop open, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Slightly off to the side, at a secondary table, Captain Lawson occupied a lone chair, back straight, hands folded, eyes fixed on her with attention he didn't bother to hide. The colonel opened a file without speaking. Pages slid across the table, printed logs, flight summaries, comm transcripts. All the evidence of the mission. All the sanitized pieces. She didn't reach for them. Instead, she placed her thumb-sized external drive beside the stack. The lieutenant colonel glanced at it, then at her. The JAG attorney made a brief note. She watched them all with a stillness that felt heavier than the silence. Months of paperwork, quiet whispers, and carefully worded memos had led to this room. She knew their process. She knew their language. She knew exactly how long they would sit in silence before someone finally acknowledged her presence. The colonel broke first. Not with words, but with a restrained exhale, the kind that comes from someone preparing to walk a narrow legal line. She opened her Pelican case. Inside were the secured sensor logs from the night flight, data pulled from the verification sweep, unedited. She set the printed copy on the table. The numbers, the beacons, the false advisory signals, they formed the same pattern she'd mapped in the ops cell. The civilian analyst leaned forward, scrolling through her digital version. His shoulders tightened. He recognized the anomalies instantly. The timestamps didn't match the official weather reports. The advisory node pinged from a location outside its authorized range. The equipment signatures matched a device type not assigned to the Marine Aviation Unit at all. The JAG attorney asked for clarification, carefully, clinically. Not accusatory, not defensive, just procedural. She answered with equal calm, describing the overlay she'd created, the inconsistencies she identified, the matching pattern between the past ambush and the redirected flight path. She spoke the way she'd been trained for after-action reports, steady, factual, precise. No embellishment. No personal theory. Only what the numbers proved. Lawson listened without moving. The understanding in his eyes grew heavier with every new detail. He knew now that their flight had not just been unusual, it had been manipulated. He knew she had saved them. He knew Sticky Six wasn't an urban legend whispered in barracks. It was earned. The colonel attempted a gentle pivot toward ambiguity, phrases like possible miscommunication, equipment malfunction, isolated incident. The JAG attorney floated the phrase fog of war, even though this was neither fog nor war. She slid another page across the table. The metadata. The same hidden node. The same erased user ID. The same redirection structure used months earlier. The explanation collapsed under its own weight. The civilian analyst cleared his throat and stated, quietly, and with visible reluctance, that the advisory pattern indicated intentional interference, not environmental error. The colonel's jaw tightened. Not at her, but at the realization that this would not disappear into a filing drawer. The lieutenant colonel requested her external drive. She handed it over. He didn't look directly at her, but his nod held something bordering on respect. The colonel ordered the matter moved to a secure investigative channel. Lawson turned his head slightly, meeting her eyes, understanding now why the hangar had fallen silent at her name. She wasn't a myth. She was a survivor who carried her truth like a blade. The session ended without ceremony. Papers gathered. Laptops closed. Coffee still untouched. As she stood to leave, no one spoke. No apology. No praise. Only the deep, unsettling quiet of people who finally realized the depth of what had been hidden, and who had uncovered it. Outside the room, the hallway felt less cold. But only slightly. Morning came softly, filtered through a thin veil of coastal fog that clung to the shoreline like a slow-moving tide. The world looked washed clean, pale sky, muted water, gulls gliding low over the surf. The base's distant loudspeakers crackled awake behind her, but out here, their announcements sounded like echoes from another life. She sat at the far edge of the pier, boots dangling just above the swaying water. The wooden boards beneath her were damp from the night's mist, darkened in uneven patches. Her hoodie was pulled tight around her shoulders, sleeves pushed up just enough for the cool air to skim the healing bruises that still patterned her skin in fading lines. Beside her sat the gray Pelican case, closed and locked. Paperwork was tucked inside, sealed inquiry summaries, temporary orders, notes about follow-up interviews and classified transfers. None of it weighed as much as the truth she carried, and none of it surprised her. Systems moved slowly. Bureaucracy avoided sunlight. But momentum had begun, and she had set it in motion. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to simply sit. No alerts. No screens. No evaluations or cautious glances. Just a steady, rhythmic lap of water against the pier pilings. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small compass. The brass was worn nearly smooth at the edges, years of friction turning the metal soft in places. The hinge creaked gently as she opened it. The needle trembled, trying to find itself as the ocean breeze swept over it. She held it level, letting the shaking settle, letting the world quiet around her. The initials carved into the back, faint, uneven, made by a hand steadier than hers was now, caught a sliver of morning light. She traced them with her thumb, following grooves she knew by heart. The compass had belonged to someone who should have survived that night. Someone who taught her how to read terrain by touch, how to breathe through panic, how to trust her own judgment when radios failed and everything went sideways. Someone the inquiry files would now name among the fallen. She didn't weep. She hadn't in a long time. Instead, she closed her eyes and let the breeze press lightly against her face. The world, for once, wasn't asking anything from her. No urgent decisions. No hidden threats. No coded betrayals waiting to be uncovered. Peace didn't arrive like a wave. It arrived like a direction. Not triumph. Not vindication. Just quiet certainty that she was still moving forward, still following the same internal compass that had guided her through fire and confusion and silence. After a long moment, she closed the compass gently and tucked it into her pocket. The pelican case clicked softly as she lifted it and set it beside her leg. It was lighter now, not physically, but in meaning. She knew what came next. The future wouldn't be simple, and the investigation would stretch on. But she had resurfaced from something meant to bury her. And she was still here. Still steady. Still northbound. Behind her, the fog began to lift, revealing the outlines of the base, hangars, barracks, the flight line where she'd first heard the name, Sticky 6, whispered like a myth. She rose from the pier. The day was waiting. There's something people forget about stories like hers. They think you can see strength from a distance. They think it comes with rank, or patches, or scars that catch the light just right. But the truth is quieter. You don't recognize someone like her until the moment everything breaks, until the night turns sideways, the radios fill with static, and the person standing next to you in a hoodie and plain boots becomes the only calm voice in the storm. You don't see a call sign before it's earned. You only see the silence that follows it, and the weight someone carries because they survived when others didn't. Most people train for impact. They rehearse chaos. They practice what to do when alarms go off and plans fall apart. But no one trains you for the silence afterward. No one teaches you how to navigate the empty rooms, the sealed files, the missing names on rosters, the guilt that comes when the world calls you lucky. No one warns you how betrayal echoes longer than explosions, or how you can spend months in a place where everyone knows your file but no one knows your story. She didn't choose the name. Sticky 6. The world gave it to her. And when the captain heard it, everything he thought he understood about her collapsed in a single breath. There are people like her all around us, quiet, unnoticed, walking through airports, sitting in cafes, clocking into ordinary jobs. You may never know what they've endured, what they carry, or how many times they've held a line that others depended on. Hidden strength rarely announces itself. If this story made you think about the people you overlook, or the ones who serve in silence, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Share a moment when someone surprised you with their resilience, or their courage. And if stories like this mean something to you, feel free to subscribe or share. Each story helps honor the people we rarely see, but always depend on. And wherever you are tonight, remember this. You can train for impact, but not for the silence after.